Welcome to the Business Mechanics Show. This is your host, Vaughn Sigmund, and I've got a very special guest with you today. His name is David McGlennen. David and I have known each other, a few weeks now, and it was one of those introductions that, man, it just clicked. I have so much respect for this guy, and I was on David's podcast, and it went so well that I said, geez, I want to bring you onto my podcast. So here he is. And let me tell you a little bit about David. David he's a business growth guide. And I love that he uses guide because he literally, as you hear him describe what he does, he really does guide businesses along where companies are looking to grow, lead, serve in this new era of business. And it gets tougher every day, folks, as you well know. And he shows leaders how to integrate their desire for high performance achievement and growth while focusing on the things they value the most. A nice balance there. A little bit more about his background, which I love. He's an entrepreneur. He's been part of a family business for his entire life. He routinely is getting out of his comfort zone, which he and I had a very nice conversation around comfort zones previously. And by doing that, he knows, as I know, that's how you learn, that's how you grow. That's his forte. And he's done some pretty notable things. He's coached and trained leaders all around the world, as far north as the Arctic Circle, which was pretty cold that day. And he's even shared the stage with one of my idols, one of the people I look up to the most, John C. Maxwell in Paraguay. He's a married father of 5, which I think he finally figured out what causes that and he quit doing it. And as I love, he shared with me that he's a recovering triathlete. With all that, David, welcome to the Business Mechanics Show. Man, I am so excited to have you.
Oh, Vaughn, I'm really excited to be here. And like you said, when we had our conversation on my podcast, it was just one of those just delightful conversations. And I was just honored to be asked to come and share and looking forward to adding value to your audience and your people.
And you are an expert on one of my favorite topics that it gets a lot of words, but it doesn't get a lot of actions. You're working in a niche that I know a lot of companies, they understand they need to do, but they don't know how to do it. And I love that you're a guide to all this. You unravel the mystery and the functionality needed to go really impact the culture within the organization. And as you and I have spoken before, I was part of a very high performance culture. I was a executive for a Fortune 100 best places to work. And I've been an executive and a manager with lots of other companies that were not. And there is a huge difference. But the cool thing, David, as I'm sure you'll share, changing your culture isn't really expensive.
No.
It's just knowing how to do it and putting the tools to place.
Yeah, exactly.
But let's get you talking because you're the expert here, not me. In your experience, David, and you've had lots of it, what are the fundamental elements that constitute a high performance culture? We talk about that all the time, but in your experience, what are those elements that every business should have in place?
Yeah, I'm glad you used that word fundamental, because to me, that's exactly where I go. I go to the fundamentals. And when I say the word fundamentals, I generally am referring to the behaviors that drive a high performing culture. And they could vary from company to company, but there are several that I feel are really necessary in any high performing culture. One, of course, is listening generously. And the other that goes along with that is speaking straight. You can't speak straight unless you're listening generously. So when it comes to a high performing culture, it's the organizations who have defined what those behaviors are that really make a difference and stand out from the crowd. And not only are they the ones that have defined those behaviors, but they're actually practicing them. and leading them. So the leader is actually leading the team through those behaviors and talking about them every chance they get. Because you're right, it doesn't take a lot of money. It doesn't take rocket science to be able to lead a good culture and a high performing culture, but it does take discipline and it takes leadership. You asked a question about the fundamentals. There's a bunch of different behaviors that I think are really instrumental in driving that. I just gave you two I think are really important, but just getting to the fundamentals and practicing those, and we can get into what that means, but really just being able to be very disciplined and making sure that you are intentional, really intentional with it.
And that is super important. I want to talk about how you get companies and leaders of companies to practice all this, but you had on my one of my favorite topics, and I have a lot, but this is one that just here recently, and you know how things go through cycles, and this is very much in the cycle right now. It's funny how things all come all together. I finally got around to reading Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. And that he's got 5 elements of leadership in there, and listening. Number 1 is listening. And I find, and I'm sure you find the same thing, that many high Ds on the DISC scale, many A-type driven personalities have a tough time understanding the value, the importance, the necessity of their ability to listen and collaborate, get other people's opinions, right? What are some of the tools or the tips you give the folks you work with to work on those listening skills? I'm really curious because I'm going to steal them from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Steal away. I usually preface this by saying I'm usually preaching to myself as I say these things because these are things that I'm still working on. I consider myself in one of it. I'm not a strong D, but I'm a DI. So I'm in that quadrant. I know you're familiar with the DISC. And the first thing that I tell people, especially around listening generously, and it's something, as I said, I say this to myself all the time: slow down, just slow down and be where your feet are. Because if you don't slow down, our brains are wired to listen at something like 900 words a minute, but we can only speak probably 150 words a minute. So there's a disconnect, there's a gap there. And so we have to just slow our mind down enough so that we can allow our mind to hear what's being said, not racing ahead to what we want to say or what we think is going to be said. So the first step really for me, listening generously, is just slowing down. I recently had somebody on my podcast who wrote a book called How to Listen. A great individual, a guy by the name of Oscar Trimboli, and highly recommend his book. And one of the things that he not only shared, but he also demonstrated is just the ability to slow down and not feel like you have to just jump in with an answer right away. It was tremendous. And it's been a lesson for me to be able to really slow down, take a breath, and just really be present with whoever I'm speaking with, especially if I need to have one of those listening generously kinds of conversations. And so I would start there. Just listening generously starts with slowing down. I can think of some other ways too to make sure that we are listening generously. And that is, first, give people your full attention. And to do that, sometimes you have to get distractions out of the way, and maybe even get a pen in your hand and take some notes. Jot a word down. You don't have to write things, word for word, but just, there you go. You got a pen. Yeah. Just jot a note down, a word that triggers a thought. It helps you to stay engaged. And it also tells the other person, I'm listening, I'm hearing you. And most times as a leader, that's exactly what people want. They want to be heard. They want to just know that whatever they want to express and are expressing is being heard. And so slowing down, engaging somehow. I like to just write a note or two, getting distractions out of the way. Those are just a few ways that leaders can listen more generously.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. And I'm sure you found, and I'm going to ask you this question in a second, but going back to the DISC profile, the D's want to get everything done. I's want to get everything done. There's this sense of urgency,
Yeah.
and they don't understand how they're slowing themselves down by jumping in or giving the answer too fast, because they're instructing people, they're telling people what to do or how to think or what to think, not creating their ability to think on their own or critical thinking skills. Slows down their growth, thus slows down your growth. And when you can get through to somebody, they understand the concept. Oh, okay. If I slow down, I'm actually going to speed up. At some time, it's an investment. At some time in the future, things are going to be better, faster, and they'll need me less. I can focus on bigger and better things, right? Or maybe go home on time. So instead of everybody being so necessitated to deal with me or get my opinion on things, there's so many bad things that come around with just jumping in and giving the answer all the time. Man, I am so with you on the listening skills. And I'd love to hear, is there somebody that you've worked with recently or in the past that once they embraced and adopted these listening skills, can you tell their story of how this changed their trajectory and their leadership or their ability to run a business?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a senior leader that comes to mind who had a bad habit of, and he was high on the D scale of the DISC, had a bad habit of when someone else was talking, he would do something like, yeah. And man, and he was just, non-verbally, verbally, he was telling people, speed it up. I got something to say. I get it. And so just in learning this fundamental, he has cut that down tremendously. I can't say that it's 100% gone because it's an ingrained habit, but he's working on it. And he's been much more effective at listening to the people he leads. And it has made a huge difference in his team. He has a new leadership team, and that team is a lot more cohesive. And I believe it's primarily because he's listening to them and making sure that he's understanding what they need, where they're stumbling, and maybe what's getting in the way. That's just one person in particular that comes to my mind, because when I think of D's, I think of the people who, just like you said, they just want to get it done and they don't have time to waste. And it's in that speeding people up or trying to speed people up where they get themselves tripped up, and they don't realize that they're getting in their own way when they're and when they do that, oh my goodness, they're just getting in their own way.
Yeah, and very often they don't, just like this gentleman, they don't know they're doing it. It's so natural to them. And as you and I both know, it is very hard to change our natural habits.
It is.
I don't know, in my opinion, tell me if I'm wrong, you brought it up first. If they can fix this part first, so many other things cascade, good things cascade,
100%.
right? From a leadership perspective.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I think just having an awareness is the first step to everything, because as leaders, we have blind spots. And if we don't have somebody helping to point them out and helping us to raise a mirror, we don't know. And even in a 360, doubtful that somebody's going to tell the president of a company that he has this bad habit. Mm-hmm. But someone who is being paid to help him to get better and to grow, he's going to listen because it's my job as his coach to be able to bring that to his attention. Just that awareness has a cascading effect.
It does. And the other cascading effect that I think is essential to leadership is building that relationship.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Trust and respect. And when it's just natural, you think about it, anybody that really listens to you and is making note and encourage you to share more of your information. I mean, trust is just the other byproduct that comes along with that, which if I've got trust and respect and I'm listening to people and they're going to listen to me, but I've got to listen first. And it's just getting that proper order.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so glad you said that, because it's the leader who has to go first. Yeah. That's the critical point. And it's so hard sometimes, but the leader has to go first. And really going back to culture for a minute, the thing that a lot of leaders don't really realize is that culture is a leadership function. And if somebody says, my culture is just really crappy, they've got to look in the mirror, because they're the ones that are either leading it or allowing it to happen. And that's not easy to hear, and it's not easy to say either, but culture is a leadership function. The best cultures, the highest performing cultures, are ones that are led with design and intention. They've designed their culture the way they want things to work, because if you think about what culture really is, it's how do we do things around here? We do listen generously, and then we also speak straight, because we want to move things forward. We don't want to just sit and have these same things happen over and over again. We also maybe practice blameless problem solving, because we want to be able to solve a problem and ask the question, what happened, and fix it, rather than who did it. But it's a different question, and it's a different outcome as well. Culture is a leadership function. And so I think the first step for every leader has to be, especially if they want to be thinking about their culture, is how am I leading this? How have I designed my culture? Have I actually went out and set up the fundamentals, the behaviors that are going to drive our success? And if they haven't done that, then that'd be the first step I'd suggest, is go out and actually take your senior leadership team and have a conversation around what are some things that you do that really drive the success of this organization. What do you see in our people that are really good, that are driving our success? And let's articulate what those behaviors are. So it's a process that leaders, I think, have to go through in order to drive that good culture.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And it takes a level of courageousness to embrace that. And, and internally and externally, you must confront that. Yeah, and exactly. Culture cannot be legislated. It has to be lived. It has to be led. 100%. And when you think about the importance of leadership, starting from the top, what are some of the key elements that this leader, or even the CEO, the business owner, the executive team, what do you have them do, or what are the suggestions or exercises you have them do to look at each other, be courageous with each other, understand that this is what we've got to change about ourselves for everything else to change? Walk me through some of the tips or the best practices you use to get leadership to change.
Yeah, it's such a great question. And as you were asking that question, the story of one of my clients comes to my mind, because it's so poignant. And I think it illustrates the answer to your question. So I'm in the boardroom with the CEO, CFO, Chief Human Resources Officer, and an executive leadership team. I can't remember exactly who all else was in the room, but I know there was probably like 6 or 7 people in the room. the CEO was right across from me, and we're discussing this process of articulating our culture in terms of behaviors. And the one thing the CEO did is he sat back and he said, I know this is the right thing. I know this is exactly what we need to do. But you know what? I'm afraid. I'm afraid if we articulate some of these behaviors that I'm not going to be able to live up to, it's going to be a failure. And my first response back to him was, you know what? If you feel like this is the right thing to do, then I suggest that you articulate that and share what you just shared with all of us in the employee meetings that we're going to have to roll this out. And he did. He got up in front of his employees and said, hey, look, guys, all of these fundamentals that we've created, they're very aspirational. This is how we want to be around here. However, I will tell you that on some of these behaviors, I know that I'm not the greatest at, so I need help. I need your help. I need the help of all of this team. And it was one of those moments when I just sat back and I went, now that's great leadership. That's great leadership. So it's vulnerability. It's just being able to bare his soul. And that, I think, illustrates the key for creating a high-performing culture that is founded on trust. Because if the leader, the CEO, the founder, the owner is willing to be able to go, hey, look, this is what I want. This is what we all want, but I'm not going to be good at everything. So help me and help me, help you. I'm going to help you. And that kind of a relationship, I think, is key to what you were asking about, Vaughn.
I'm very impressed by that. And there's the few times I've seen this or seen this happen where somebody as willingly, as quickly as this individual became vulnerable and took the right path. That was a brilliant approach, brilliant 100%, approach.
Yeah.
And I'm betting things got better pretty quickly there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that when an organization articulates and creates these behaviors and writes them out, practices them, talks about them, what happens is they can actually be measured then, because what we can do is we can create a survey and just send those surveys out to employees, to vendors, to customers, and survey, hey, how well are we living up to this? On a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being we're not doing a great job at all, 5 we're hitting it out of the park. Where do you see us? Where do you see us on that scale? And that way, when you do that, then you can find out pretty quickly in whatever constituency you have, whether it's your own employees, whether it's your vendors, whether it's your customers. You're going to find out how well you're living up to those and making sure that those numbers are improving. And there may be an area where you're not doing so great. Let's fix that. Let's work on that. And so that area of maybe practicing blameless problem solving, maybe with your employees, when you survey them, they don't think we're doing such a great job. And so let's fix that. Let's work on that. I think that is really key to any high-performing culture.
Yeah. And I bet as you lay out these surveys and they get their first 1 or 2, that you find leaders within their organization justifying their bad behaviors.
Yeah.
Sometimes tough to swallow that kind of feedback.
Yes, exactly.
Especially when you haven't been getting it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So as you watch, there's 2 important questions I must ask you. One, how many questions on an employee survey do you suggest? Is that 300? Is it 30? Is it 2? What's the number of questions that should go out?
Here's what we do. Depending on the number of, again, I'm using the terminology fundamentals. Those are the behaviors. So however many fundamentals that they have, That's the number of questions you should have. How are we doing on listening generously? How are we doing on getting clear on expectations? How are we doing on practicing blameless problem solving? All of the, how are we doing on being a fanatic about response time? I'm trying to go run through some of these fundamentals that some of our clients have expressed. And so to answer your question, it really depends on how many the company has. Now, there's no magic number. I had one client who was very analytical and they said, we want 26. And I said, why do you want 26? They said, if we're going to do one a week, if we're going to talk about one a week, then we can get through them twice in 1 year. I'm like, okay, fair enough. Cool. But it really doesn't matter.
That's some linear thinking right there. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. But so to answer your question, honestly, it doesn't matter. But however many fundamentals the company has is how many questions they should ask, because they want to gauge themselves on the actual behavior. How are we doing against the behavior?
And before I forget about it, I want to share with the audience. I'll put in the show notes a link to get in touch with David. And I guarantee that if you reach out to him, he'll discover with you what you need to work through. He'll help custom tailor design the questions, the survey, the tools, the exercises. So if you're interested in investing in yourself, investing in your company, David's your man. David's the guy that's going to get you there. And so please click on his link, go visit him, talk to him. There's other ways of measuring culture outside of just on a 5-point scale, but I've heard a couple ROIs on a high performance culture. You specifically work in this space. From an ROI standpoint, what if a company invests X number of dollars into your services, your programs, to take their time and work through improving their culture? What do you see as in the way of a transformation that returns on that investment? What kind of numbers can a company expect?
Yeah, Vaughn, that's a really hard one. But here's what I point to a study that was done by some Harvard professors, and it's actually referenced in a book called Conscious Capitalism. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but a really great book. And it's actually in the appendix. I know I'm weird, but I actually read the whole book. And the appendix.
Check, you are weird. Yes.
I know, exactly. I'm weird. I read the appendix. But in that appendix, they actually took these companies where they compared, if I'm not mistaken, they call them the firms of endearment. So there are these companies like a Google, like a Starbucks, who have really worked on their culture, and they looked at their performance over a period of time. And I don't quote me on this, but it's something like a 900% increase in their value over a period of, I think it's 10 years. And so I look at that and I go, if I'm a small business owner, maybe I'm not going to make 900% return, but it's going to make a big difference. It's going to make a huge difference. And if Google can do it, if Starbucks can do it, if Chick-fil-A can do it, I can do it. And it's going to make a big impact, not only on my bottom line, but it's also going to make an impact on the people that stay, the people that leave, because sometimes that's just as important as the people that stay, is the people that do leave. And it's going to create an environment where people want to be, and they don't get the Sunday scaries. They actually on Sunday evening are looking forward to going to work on Monday morning. And I think that's really how you can measure the ROI, not only in a financial measurement, but also in a non-financial measurement.
Yeah, imagine that as a leader in an organization where the vast majority of the folks who work with you get up and look forward to coming to work. How much better do you think those employees perform for you versus those who dread it?
Exactly.
And there's a book on customer service, but I know it also works into the same question, works into what we're talking about today, the ultimate question. Would you recommend X business to your friends,
Yes,
family, coworkers? And that is an important question on a survey. Would you
it
recommend
is.
your employer to friends and family as a great place to work? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
imagine if,
absolutely.
from a recruiting standpoint, if you got your best employees recruiting for you, holy cow.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're not gonna want to have jerks come work with them, right? They want only the best. They want great people. And so yeah, absolutely. 100% I agree with you, Vaughn.
And to point out the painfully obvious, to the opposite of that, David, if you end up hiring a really great person and they come into an environment, a culture that's not very productive, not very happy, not high performance,
Yeah.
those are the ones that are going to spin out and go someplace else, because that
Right.
person is of a very high value to other employers.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're losing your best people because
Yeah.
you're introducing them into a poor culture that you
Yeah.
have 100% control over. Now, it's,
Exactly.
as the old leadership saying goes, there's no bad teams, there's only bad leaders.
Yep.
But
Exactly.
leadership can be learned. It can be
Sure
taught,
can.
it can be learned. And what you're doing is some of the most important work any leader can embrace and take action on. Is, how do I create the workplace that's going
Yeah.
to drive the performance, the productivity, the stickiness, the
Mm-hmm.
wanting, the desire, the dedication, all those great adjectives
Yeah.
that you want, but you can't force. And
Right.
you may likely be unknowingly creating the opposite of in your approach to dealing with people.
Yes,
David fixes
exactly.
all that for you. And other important question I wanted to ask you. I know you come across more than your fair share of pitfalls that you see companies fall into as they're going through this journey of improvement.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the common? I love to say I've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Yeah, here's one of those
Yeah.
opportunities today where you can share some of the pitfalls or mistakes that others have made. So maybe you
Yeah.
can set them up for even faster success. What are some
Mm-hmm.
of those pitfalls that you see happen out there?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that comes to my mind is not following through with something that I call rituals and creating a cadence on making this a reality in our everyday world. It's no different than at the beginning of the year, everybody has these aspirations to do great things for the year. I'm going to lose 50 pounds. I'm going to work out 5 days a week. It's human behavior. The first place where people fall down is, hey, we've got this great culture initiative and we're going to articulate our culture in terms of these behaviors, and then it falls flat because nobody follows through. So what you have to do is you have to drive that ritual, that cadence. I like to call them rituals because if you think about creating any kind of a habit, there are certain things, certain triggers that create a behavior, and then we get a reward, and that creates a loop effect. It's called the habit loop. So in any organization, we have to create, what's the thing that we're going to do, what's the triggering event. So let's say, for example, we're a manufacturing company and we've got a startup meeting. Maybe it's a safety briefing. A lot of manufacturing companies are lean manufacturing, and so they may have a stand-up meeting where they talk about the red element of the day or the yellow. And within that context, you can also then add, what's our fundamental of the week? This week's fundamental is, we're going to practice blameless problem solving around here. And so part of our lean process is also to practice blameless problem solving. It goes right into the fundamental of getting to the root cause. And so we're going to talk about that every time this comes up. And maybe that in that stand-up meeting, you have a short discussion around what does it mean to practice blameless problem solving? How do we handle these red elements and these red issues on safety or on quality? And how are we going to make them correct them? How are we going to correct them going forward? So that's one way, but just being able to work them into your regular everyday life. Yeah. One of my clients will start every meeting that they have with their fundamental of the week. And so the very beginning of the meeting, there's an agenda item and it's the fundamental of the week. And so they'll discuss it. They'll pull out probably a card. I just happen to have one of these set in here, but they'll pull out a card that looks something like this that has their fundamentals on it. And let's pick one here that they might have. Make quality personal. So the leader then is going to read that and say, take pride in the quality of everything you touch and everything you do. Always ask yourself, is this my best work? Everything you touch has your signature on it and makes a statement about you. Make sure it's a statement of excellence. Okay, so that's our fundamental of the week. So what gets in the way of us actually signing our name in bold ink on everything that we do? And then they shut up. And then they allow a short discussion. Doesn't have to be long, 2 minutes maybe. And when we start, think about how many meetings you have. How many meetings do you have in a day? If we start every meeting with that same fundamental, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then next week we do the next fundamental, which is be proactive. Each of us, I guess I'm demonstrating here what we can do to create that cadence, create that rhythm in something that we're already doing so that it just becomes part of who we are around here.
Yeah, I've seen that happen so many times that it just spins out. And then they 6 months later say, oh, what were we doing about culture? And oh, that didn't work. Yeah, we know why it didn't work, because you didn't stick with it. So it's a real commitment, right? It's not for sissies, right?
Exactly.
You've got to commit, and you've got to be, you said it earlier, very intentional about it. Either you don't even start. Right.
Exactly.
Don't even start, because you're just going to look foolish. You're going to make it even worse.
Yeah.
If you don't intend to do this permanently. But let me ask you this. Average case scenario, not best case, not worst case, average case scenario. If someone is truly, a company really commits to this, the executive team is dug in, they're going to do it, they're doing it. How quickly, on average, do they start seeing a turn, an improvement? How long does it take to see a change?
Yeah. It's interesting. I would say just probably on average, and I'm guessing here, I don't have hard data that I could point to, but I'm going to say on average, it's probably in a month or two, because what's going to start to happen is people are going to start to take this thing and they're going to start to use that language. They're going to start to use language like, hey, I need to have a speak straight conversation. There's something that I just want to get out on the floor so that we can move it forward. And so it's really not a long time. You'll start to hear in conversations really quickly, because they start to pick up the vocabulary of the culture. And that's exactly what you want. You want it everywhere. To be able to put it on your walls, put it on your mouse pads, put it on your screensavers. Heck, I even had an employer put it on in their bathrooms, in the stalls, and in the be able to create the fundamental of the week, because you want to be able to put it everywhere. So when you do that, people then begin to use the language of the culture, and that happens really quickly.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I've seen those same actions being taken. And it's, for those of you who think this sort of thing is goofy, that's not how I do things. You'll be shocked if you do it, how quickly, to David's point, they pick up on the language. You'll start seeing the adoption and the commitment from the employee base, the direct report base, because they love this stuff. And it's not what you think, it's what they think. Because it's them that's going to make you successful, not necessarily you. And don't approach this with the mindset, I wouldn't do it. I don't do things that way. It's not how you want to do it. It's how David, being an expert, understands that people do embrace it, do want it, will take advantage of it and start adopting it. And you're the benefactor.
And something you said a minute ago, Vaughn, I just want to jump in on, because I think it's really important. If we're talking to a leader who thinks that way, saying that this is not the way I do it, I would challenge you just to pause for a second and ask yourself, but what if I could get my company to be better? What would that be worth to me? What would that be worth to me? What would that be worth to all of the people that I care about? And what if it was something just a little bit different? What would that open up for you? What possibilities might that open up? And so I think it takes a growth mindset, to be honest. And there's just so many aspects of culture, especially when we have such a diverse range of generations in the workforce. We've got the Gen Zs that are really young, and this is probably their first rodeo. And maybe there's the baby boomers who this isn't their first rodeo, but somehow we've got to be able to bridge those gaps and those experiences to be able to help us each learn and grow. And when we do that, man, that creates an environment where everybody thrives, there's meaning, and we can really accomplish the mission that's perhaps on our wall.
And you just, so right. You sparked a question as you were saying that, because of the diversity of the workplace. I don't know, in my 40 plus years of managing and leading people, it's been more necessary, required than it is right now. And let's just face the fact, we can't change a generation and how they think. We have to adapt to that generation and make sure providing what that generation thinks and needs. You can't fight it with an aluminum baseball bat. You're going to have to approach it in a way that's going to be successful. What you're talking about is absolutely successful. But what the other question that sparked as you were saying that, David, is, and I'm sure you do it this way, you don't measure engagement necessarily as an entire company, as one complete roll-up. It's important to measure it by manager, because each manager creates their own culture within your culture, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And so there's no one size fits all. Each person are going to take the fundamentals of a high performance culture, make it their own. There's gutter guards that are going to keep you in place, but what you need to do, you're going to do in your own style. You have to give managers that freedom without overstepping their bounds or denying it or doing it their own way. There's rules around all this, methods around all of it. But it's important to understand that not only as you're measuring it, gauging it, you'll have pockets of success, you'll have pockets of resistance. But again, back to, there's no bad teams, there's only bad leaders. And I'm going to say this, David, so you don't have to, and you can thank me later. In all my years, and I've managed thousands and thousands of people, dozens of companies, if I've got a problem with performance with either a team or a location, I change one person, I change the dynamics, I change the success of that entire team. It is completely dependent on the leadership qualities, skill sets of the individual who's leading those individuals. It's not the individuals. But there's been test after test where you take a bad team, put a great leader in charge of them, they become a much better, if not a high performance team. Knowing that there may be some bad individuals on there, but the high performance leader will move them out of the way. They see the value of that, the whole to replace them with better people.
Yes.
It's never a complete rebuild. Never a complete rebuild. It's selective remodeling. And I've seen this happen, you take a very high performing team, you put an ineffective leader in there, those same people are going to underperform. And I put that in there because that's almost rhetorical, but it's so important that you keep that in mind, because leadership is the key. The individual, it's not just you as the CEO that's going to make a difference. You've got to get everybody down the line to the organizational chart to be doing this at some level of high performance as well.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, what's interesting, Vaughn, as you shared that, the thought that came into my mind is that one aspect of culture is having those leaders that you have in your organization begin to learn the skills of creating other leaders. That's what's going to perpetuate the high performing culture. And that's what's going to help you to grow that culture and really push it down throughout the organization.
And you're the one that spent time with Maxwell. That's in his book.
Absolutely.
Right? That's
many of them.
That's the fourth and fifth level. All are dependent on who you can produce in the way of leadership. That is the true measure, right?
Absolutely.
And you get to that point, man, there's no stopping you as an organization.
Yeah, very true.
David, this has been fantastic. And I thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to spend time with me and my audience. Tell them more about Impact Leadership, how they can get in touch with you, and anything else you want to share about getting in touch with David. And again, I'll put in the show notes, your contact information.
Sure. Yeah. So you can check me out on my website. It's probably the best place to find out a little bit more about what I do, how I do it. davidmcglennen.com. It's DavidMcGlennen.com. And of course, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with great people, great leaders, and have conversations. And yeah, if there's any way that I can help your listeners, happy to do that. Happy to have a conversation for sure.
Yeah, you definitely spell your name incorrectly, because even spell check doesn't allow that your name to be spelled that way.
It doesn't like it, huh? Yeah, right.
That's the reason why I want to put the link in the show notes to make it easy.
Absolutely.
David, this has been fantastic. I look forward to coming across you again and us interacting in the future.